One of the great myths that our society perpetuates is that if anyone is super rich, they must be a super genius. And this is not true. And there's a few reasons why this is not true, that when you start to peer in the dynamics of the correlation between wealth and talent, the whole idea breaks down and luck plays a much bigger role than we are told. So the first thing to understand is that some human traits are normally distributed, they have a bell curve to them, and some are not normally distributed. So for example, if you think about height is going to be clustered around a relatively narrow band. You're not going to find a human that's 1 foot tall, and you're not going to find a human that's 200 feet tall, right? And as a result of this, you have a sort of normal distribution around a relative average. But wealth is not like this. Wealth is distributed on what has a long tail. It has this really long distribution at the top, and then a lot of people clustered towards the bottom. So there's a large number of people who have sort of average incomes, and then a few people who might be 100 or 1,000 or even 1,000,000 times richer than somebody else on the planet. And this creates a mismatch, because in order to produce that long tail, you need to have some serious luck. Now, my favorite study that shows this was a collaboration between some physicists and an economist, and they developed what is basically a sort of fake world with some crude relationships between wealth and talent. Talent is normally distributed. You have people who are clustered around a sort of normal area, the average of human society, and then you have a small number of people who are really talented and a small number of people who are really not so talented. But nobody in the world is like 1,000,000,000 times more talented than somebody else. And what this means is that when luck is introduced into the equation, when you have these sort of lightning strikes that we can think of with luck, they're going to hit in the place that has the most people. Because if you imagine a sort of bell curve where most people are in the talent spectrum, the idea that the lightning is going to strike the one person who's the most talented in the world or the one person who's the least talented in the world, it's just highly improbable. So instead what's going to happen is the lightning is going to hit someone around the middle value of talent. Now when that happens, it's going to increase the chance that they become wealthy. If they get struck by lightning twice, the odds of them becoming extremely wealthy increase, right? So what ends up happening in these simulations they run is that over and over, the richest person in their fake world is not somebody of extreme talent. It's somebody who's marginally above average on talent who happens to get lucky. And I think this is the way the world works. I think we have a lot of complex dynamics that are producing these outcomes, not to mention, by the way, all the things we can't control, like whether you were born rich, which is highly correlated with being rich in the future, and also whether you had a network that supported you through connections and so on. And a lot of people who are super rich, pretend that they have earned everything, that they deserve their wealth, and that they obviously are the most talented person. And I think this is just something that is fundamentally a myth. It's not possible to become extremely wealthy if you have zero talent, but as long as you have some and you get lucky, you're more likely to end up on those long tails of the high degree of wealth. And I think this is something that our modern world infers backwards, that genius is something that always is attached to the people who are wealthy. And sometimes they were just the random byproduct of lightning hitting them rather than somebody else. Elon Musk is one of these great examples, I think, of someone who has some level of talent, but perhaps not as much as everybody pretends. And what happens with Elon Musk is, I think he got lucky. I think he got super rich. And as a result of that, he inferred that therefore he must be a genius, and therefore that his skills are transferable into everything else that he could possibly throw himself into, which has turned out to not be the case. So you look at some of the areas where he has had financial success, and then you assume, well, the reason for the success is because you're a genius. And geniuses, of course, all believe that they can control their own future and that their talent will see them through no matter what realm they enter. Now, Elon Musk has had some success with cars and with rocket ships and so on, and some of that is due probably to his talent, but some of it is also due to the talent of the people who work for him, the scientists who run the breakthroughs, the funding mechanisms that allow him to get government grants and so on. And when he's been on his own, which is to say when he's acquired Twitter, for example, he basically lit tens of billions of dollars on fire and made that social media site worth a fraction of what it was before, because his so-called genius wasn't transferable to the realm of social media. And I think it's one of the huge problems of societies. Actually, there's a lot of things about billionaires that are not due to luck or to talent. They're due to their greed. So one of the things that I think about with this as well is there is a degree of overconfidence and a degree of thirst for money that you have to have in order to become a billionaire. So with the thirst for money, for example, if somebody gave me $2 billion, the first thing that I would not do is say, oh my God, how can I get $3 billion? I would give away most of my money. People who are billionaires, they look at the 2 billion and they say, how can I have 3? And then they get 3 billion and they say, how can I have 4? So what's happened is you have a self-selection of certain traits that make it more likely that these people will become super, super rich after they have gotten lucky because they are greedy. And so, I think there is a lot of the mythology around billionaires and a lot of the mythology around people like Elon Musk infers backwards this straight line between talent and wealth. And there's so much more going on there. And I think the immediate assumption that the genius must be embedded in the person who is financially successful in one industry is a great misunderstanding of how our world works and the sort of arbitrary nature and sometimes the unfairness with which talent and wealth are not strictly correlated.
Want to dive deeper? Become a Big Think member and join our members-only community, watch videos early, and unlock full interviews.
Well, when I first started out my work in the cattle industry, designing equipment, I designed the front end of every Cargill beef plant in North America. I think that's doing pretty good for somebody they thought was stupid. Autism can range from just being kind of geeky and not that social to somebody that has much more severe problems like epilepsy, may not speak, and it's all called the same name. That, to me, is overgeneralizing. And a lot of these super good employees would probably be diagnosed today as autistic. I'm seeing a lot of smart kids being labeled autism, kids that we need in the workplace, and parents and teachers are getting too hung up on the label. They don't think the kid can learn how to do anything. I've seen bad stuff just recently where they won't let special ed kids take shop class because of liability. I had people that designed and built equipment for me that if they were kids, they'd be special ed kids, and they own the shops. And they had 20 patents to go along with them. Hi, I'm Temple Grandin. I am Distinguished Professor of Animal Science at Colorado State University. My most recent book is Visual Thinking, The Hidden Gifts of People Who Think in Pictures, Patterns, and Abstractions. I had very severe speech delay and very severe symptoms as a young child, so I was very lucky to get into really early intervention. But there's a lot of people that they discover that they're autistic when their kids get diagnosed. And it will explain why they're so socially awkward. When I was in high school, I was bullied and bullied and bullied. That was the worst part of my life. The only places I was not bullied was friends who shared interests. So the only places I was not bullied was riding horses, model rocket club, and electronic circuit building. And I often get asked, what would I tell my younger self? Well, I'd tell my younger self in high school that things are going to get better when high school's over with. What's given my life meaning is having an interesting career. When I first started in the 70s in the Arizona cattle industry, being a woman was a much bigger barrier than autism. Autism was just about a non-issue. And I got along really well with the work crews out in the field. Most of the problems I had was middle management. It was not the big bosses that owned the places. One of my very good mentors was Jim Uhl, a contractor. He had seen some of my drawings. He seeked me out. He had a little tiny construction company, maybe 2 employees for steel and concrete work. And the jobs that are shown in the HBO movie, Jim and I built those jobs together. We worked together for 10 years. When I first started working with cattle, I looked at what cattle were looking at when they moved through chutes to get vaccinated. And at that time, I thought everybody was a visual thinker. I think in pictures. It's what's called an object visualizer. Everything I think about is a picture. And it was difficult for me to understand why other people didn't notice that the cattle would refuse to walk over a shadow. They'd balk if they saw a reflection off the bumper of a vehicle. That's just so obvious to me. I thought everybody thought that way until I was in my late 30s. And it was a shock to find out that some other people thought in words. And not everybody's thinking works the same way. Research shows there's actually 3 kinds of thinking. There's object visualizers like me, where everything you think about is a picture, like a photograph. And then you have the visual spatial pattern thinkers. These are your mathematicians. They think in patterns. And then you've got your word thinkers that think in words. And then you've got mixtures of the different kinds of thinking. So let's discuss what the different kind of thinkers might be good at doing. My kind of mind, the object visualizer, will be good at mechanical devices, because you can see how they work, art, photography, and animals. And the thing that we cannot do is abstract math. I can do arithmetic. I understand things like pi times the radius squared for sizing hydraulic cylinders, and then I see the hydraulic cylinders when I say that. Now, your visual spatial thinker who thinks in patterns, they're going to be your IT people, your computer programmer, chemists, physicists. They calculate how to do things. And then, of course, you have your verbal thinkers that think in words, where they're much more linear in their thinking. Verbal thinkers are going to gravitate towards things like sales, where you have to be very good at talking. They'll gravitate towards writing, legal, teaching. Autism, you tend to get an extreme thinker. You might get an extreme mathematician who'll be a top physicist. Einstein didn't talk until age 3. He probably would be in an autism program today. Or you can get these extreme word thinkers that are very, very detailed oriented, very good at doing quality assurance, for example. We need all the different kinds of minds. And I've talked to a lot of business leaders. And the first thing I tell business leaders is, you got to understand that people think differently and that they can work together in very complementary ways. If you want to successfully hire neurodivergent people with autism, dyslexia, or ADHD who are going to get the jobs done for you, we need to get rid of the conventional interview process. They need to have opportunities to come in and show off the work and show the work to somebody who would appreciate it, rather than just interviewing based on how well they talk. Because you can have a super good computer person that's not very talkative, but that person may be your best programmer. So many people like me have had to go in back doors into jobs. A back door is anything that doesn't involve a standard interview or applying online. Everything I did was backdoor. One of my first jobs was writing for our State Farm magazine. And I met the editor at a cattle event, and I got his card. I saw that door. And then I produced an article. We need to make sure we leave those back doors open, because there may be some of the most visionary people. I worked with skilled tradespeople that were definitely undiagnosed autism. They're retiring now because they're my age. And what concerns me is who's going to replace them. Because that kid that should be fixing elevators or inventing mechanical devices is playing video games in the basement instead of working for your company. There's some beneficial things you can learn from video games, and that's true, but not playing them for 10 hours a day. When I was a young child, I'd spend hours tinkering with little parachutes and tinkering with little kites, getting them to work, trying lots of designs. I like to build things. Kids are not doing that. Kids today are not getting opportunities to learn from mistakes. And they're being so overprotected, they're not getting exposed to enough different things. I've had educators say, what would I do to change the school system? I'd put all the hands-on classes back in. And that would give a lot of the kids like me more opportunities to find things that they would be good at. I got interested in the cattle industry because I was exposed to it as a teenager. If you are given enough opportunities to try a lot of things, then you'll tend to gravitate towards the stuff that you're good at.
Get smarter, faster with videos from the world's biggest thinkers. To learn even more from the world's biggest thinkers, get Big Think Plus for your business.